Welcome to the overview of Assignment 5, SDNX 611, Fall 2014. This is Professor Fleming. This is really about the evolution of your project and about the final presentation. So this is an outline of some of the things you're going to be creating for this project, for this assignment. So, for example, you're going to be asked to collect and represent background and preparation summation from the summer. We're going to be looking at a four-quadrant analysis of your project and also the evolution of your project since assignment 3. And those will be from the four perspectives as usual. We're going to be looking again at synergies and integration that we can see within your project, the final presentations itself, both graphic and video, and then an in-depth analysis. If you'd like to talk about that, that's going to be plus 10 extra credit points. But the points for this are going to be 25. So, just getting into a little bit more detail, there are two major ways to organize the presentation. The first one, option one, is to explain the project factually, which means to show the location, the site plan, the plan, an aerial view, and just explain to the viewer slash reader how the project is, what the project actually is, and then take them through your thought process, and that's pretty important. That's what we do in design presentations. In this case, you could take them through your thought process by each perspective and organize it through systems, experience, culture, and performance. So for example, from a systems perspective, I tried to achieve the following at multiple scales. So we're also going to be looking at how you were able to do each of these perspectives at multiple scales. And I'll explain this as we go forward. The other way to go is to explain the project factually and then take them through your thought process by scale. Describe each perspective within each scale. For example, at the global scale, I tried to express the four perspectives by ... At the regional scale, I tried to express the four perspectives ... At the site scale, at the building scale, and at the interior scale. And that's another way that you could organize what you want to do. In any case, there will be a graphic presentation which can have as much information as you choose and be as long as you want. And then there is the video presentation, which is condensed or distilled version of the project, and that video should be as short as possible. That explains your project. So I'm going to take you through some of the requirements, all of the requirements for the final presentations, and then I'm sure you're going to have questions. So we're going to meet probably, I guess we should meet as soon as Tuesday night really to go over this, or Wednesday at lunch. So here's some of the background summation and preparatory knowledge that you want to have in there. The one thing I do want to note is that it's my job to give you a overview of the studio itself and what the goals of the studio are. So I'll be working on that in parallel with what you're working on. And then these are just kind of straightforward drawings and visual descriptions of what you've done. There should be no kind of interpretation or explanation of why you did what you did. This is purely the facts and nothing more than the facts. So you want to have those there. And just speaking of the facts, I just want to go back real quick and reiterate that these are things that you spent a lot of time on this summer, and you have a lot of information on it that's pretty well developed. For those of you who are like super uber students, you could take your entire summer presentation and that you did in PDF and then put that in front of this if you'd like. I won't take it personally. Now, in terms of what's actually due, before you start to panic, you're going to see that I've got each perspective organized by scales. At some scales, there's not going to be a lot to do. So, for example, at the global scale, for a systems perspective, we're mostly talking about global warming and climate change, which gives you an opportunity to reiterate why you're doing what you're doing, why are you pursuing sustainability. And certainly at the regional scale, we can look at systems, say, for combined sewer system problems that the city has, and why exactly are you trying to begin to collect all your stormwater on site. At the district scale, you can talk about the local ecosystems, the hydrology. You can begin to talk about some of the responses that you might have had. And again, these are all responses now that we're in here, not the actual analysis that you did in the original project this summer. This is actually what you did in your design. So, for example, understanding your site circulation and context of the larger neighborhood systems. So what I'm looking for here is how did the organization of your circulation on your site impact the eco district or the neighborhood scale. Another example might be and some of these are not applicable. I'm warming up for the next year's project. So, for example, you might want to think about infrastructure. So, if you're looking at the stormwater infrastructure of the neighborhood, how does your project relate to that or connect to it? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it separates itself from that. Certainly at the site scale, you can begin to have a single diagram that explains all of these elements. How are you dealing with stormwater? How are you collecting rainwater? How do people move on your site? What is the security system on the site? What's the secure and unsecure spaces? What kind of microclimates did you create? You could put these as separate diagrams or as layers on a single diagram, but clearly you want to be able to explain how you as a sustainable designer attempted to respond to and address systems at a site scale. And then the same is true for a building scale. Um, so for example, if you remember Shannon's presentation earlier this semester, she had some basic organization of HVAC systems that were used to heat and cool a building. And the same could be true, for example, of passive systems. What kinds of things did you do at the building scale to, for example, bring in daylighting or bring in natural cooling? Or did you do anything from a passive way to heat your building? You should be doing this by some simple diagrams with arrows. Circulation, how is the building organized from a circulation system? What are the major pathways and endpoints? We didn't really talk about waste systems, so I'm not looking for that, but there could be a very simple waste diagram of trash and recyclings are generated, sent to the mechanical area or to the facilities area, and then sent off by truck. And energy systems, we want to look at your PV and how you did that and how that works. For some of you, and not all of you, you might get to a wall section, so this is optional. But in your energy modeling, you might have had to select an R value for your wall. Then there's the spatial system. So if you remember, you guys spent a lot of time in programming looking at relationships between spaces. So how did you respond to that, and how well did you organize those spaces? And then even at the scale of the room, we want to know how did you deliver the services or systems into the classroom. And we're only going to take a classroom here. So you want to drill down into the systems in terms of that and take a look at that in a little bit more detail. And again, these could be done as simple diagrams or shown through section and or plan. At the experience scale, you're probably not going to have a global experience in this project. So this is really reserved for projects that are maybe have become landmarks around the world, which, you know, if you were designing the new World Trade Center, you might be thinking about experience at a global scale. At the regional scale, what's interesting about your project is you have people driving by Henry Avenue all the time past this project. So although this is really a neighborhood scale building, it does have some regional impact from an experience point of view as people walk by or hike by or ride their bikes by. One of the things that we're interested in experience scale is spatial progression and configuration. What kind of spaces did you create, and how do people move through those spaces as a series of events? Some of you with a design background will be able to knock this out pretty easily. Those without a design background can take your best shot or just leave it optional. It's no problem. But obviously views to and from the site, that should be easy. And again, these could all be on one diagram too. Where did you create some of the sound? And this is at the neighborhood scale, by the way. So, no, this is at the regional scale. Excuse me. So you might just want to skip through a lot of this right now and go right down to the district scale and start to begin to talk about spatial progression. So, for example, you have a 4-story building across the street. What is the scale or spatial progression between that building and your building? What kind of open and closed spaces are you creating? And again, if you don't have a design background, this would be kind of Greek to you. But certainly from a neighborhood scale, looking at sight, sounds, and this is where you get into the river and the bridge and the gas stations and all the kind of things at the neighborhood scale that would impact the project. How did you accomplish, how did you relate to those, and how did you make those perhaps better or worse? Certainly at the site scale, you would want to look at your spatial progression, your open and closed spaces, your defined and undefined spaces, and how you were able to do that as a designer. Again, if you don't have a design background, don't worry too much about this. We can talk one-on-one about that if you'd like. but certainly you did create views on your site either onto the building, away from the building, towards the river. But really this is about site and views within your site. So what are things that you see from certain angles that will have a certain meaning for people as they use it? Sounds on site, maybe you have a fountain, maybe you have trees swaying in the breeze. How did you create some sounds? What are the textures of the materials on the site? Is your site very soft? Is it very hard? Is there a mix of hard and soft, hard versus soft spaces? You've got smells, so how did you create or avoid certain bad smells or create new smells that are good? And what kind of biophilic responses were you able to create on the site? How did you give a sense of connection to nature and natural phenomenon? And finally, for designers, some of the three-dimensional architectural vocabulary in terms of landscape. If you're a landscape architect, there's a whole sense of vocabulary that you might be able to achieve through the selection of plants and elements on the site. And then spatial proportion. Are the buildings, for example, too high or too low in relation to the spaces that they're defining? So you can begin to think about how you were able to achieve comfortable spaces for people to inhabit outdoors and how you could create usable spaces for people to create outdoors. Same thing at the building scale. What are some of the spatial progressions? What are some of the views inside and outside of the building? Any kind of sounds or touches or smells that you could create. So for example, if you have a natural element in the lobby or a living wall, for example, in your project, this is where you can begin to address some of these and certainly a living wall will address a biophilic response inside your space. And you could still be adding some of these things into your project. Some of you have lobbies that you probably haven't brought a lot of natural elements into it yet. And the building itself has an architectural vocabulary. Does it hold together visually? What are some of the proportions of the facades? How does that tie together and create a sense of a unified sense of architecture? And again, for those of you who do not have a design background, that might be, oh, this was interiors, this was inside, sorry. And then at the room scale, at the classroom, I want you to drill down into the classroom and talk about the same series of events that occur. So when you come in the front door, for example, of the classroom, what is it that you see? Do you see outside? Do you see the classroom blackboard? All of those kind of things are there. And then same thing for that if you're a designer. Now, so that's systems. Now you have all of this already in your head. So if you don't, you have time to add it into your project. I just don't want you to panic and start thinking that, oh, I never thought about this before, because you did. You think about it all the time when you design. What's happening here is I'm just making everything visible to you that you already have in your head, and you have to make it visible to the people that are reviewing your project. From a culture and society perspective at the global level, we do worry about and look at diversity as an opportunity. Is how do you create a project that's open to everyone from diverse backgrounds? And a lot of that comes from policy and not necessarily physical environment, but you can talk about it if you want. At the regional scale, is this connected to the culture of Philadelphia? Maybe, maybe not. You are along the Kelly Drive and the river there, so there's a little bit of a regional city scale impact that you might have through your project. Certainly at the district scale or the neighborhood scale, you're going to be dealing with how does your building fit in culturally into the neighborhood, or how does it actually enhance the neighborhood culture, or not, or is it just a neutral participant in the neighborhood culture? So for example, if you have spaces in your project that are open to the neighborhood for use for events, to me that's a great eco-district scale response to a building and makes your building more sustainable. At the site scale, obviously there are things you can do from a cultural point of view to get people to use outdoor spaces in a very effective way. So how do you begin to allow for opportunities on the site that can impress or improve the cultural sensitivity of the project? At the building scale, what are some of the things you did to reinforce or change the culture of the organization? And let me just go back here. So for Mequon, right, Mequon has a very specific kind of understanding of how they want to have students interact with the natural world. So from a cultural standpoint, in terms of reinforcing the culture of the institution, the kind of things you do in your playgrounds and outside of your building would reinforce that culture. The same is true for the building. The building should express the culture of the organization. So what things did you do to reinforce or change the culture of organization at the design of the building in the inside and outside? So what are some of the things you did? So for example, if you have a lobby that has a lot of natural elements in it or has a sense of discovery, that would probably reinforce the Mi'kmaq culture. And then same for the classroom. You know, there's a certain way that the school has in terms of its philosophy of education. So the layout and the use of the classroom in certain ways would reinforce the culture. So for this project, I wouldn't expect to see a bunch of chairs lined up facing a blackboard. That suggests a certain kind of culture or philosophy about the learning. And in this case, for Mi'kmaq, that probably wouldn't make sense, and don't worry about that. Um, and so performance, this is the one that you're really going to be spending a lot of time on right now. You're going to be doing an energy analysis, which is calculating your amount of energy savings versus the base building load. You're going to be doing a daylight analysis, and that could be if you're doing the independent project. A lot of you are trying to do daylighting, you'll have lots there, but if you just want to do a Sapphira overall daylight analysis to see how well it's performing from a daylight perspective, that would be fine. Stormwater analysis, how much stormwater is collected on site and where, and if you wanted to have a net zero discharge of stormwater, were you able to achieve that? You need to prove that by a calculation. Same thing with the water use in the building and the collection of stormwater from the roofs. You're going to want to do a calculation to prove that you've met the benchmarks that you set before. Didn't really cover waste analysis in the course, so I'm not going to ask you to do that. I am working very hard to get a cost estimator in to see if you guys did in fact reach your target budgets that you identified in the summer. I'd love to see you do a carbon footprint analysis of the total carbon that you are generating from the project and how much carbon was removed from the project. So this would be, so up here is, just to be clear, this is where you would do net zero energy, right? And you should know that net zero energy is different than carbon output. And then here you might do a carbon footprint analysis. I think Sapphira gives that to you. So if you do a carbon footprint analysis, make sure you tell us how much carbon is saved and what kind of overall impact that has in terms of number of trees planted or number of cars taken off the road. We didn't really do toxicity, and we're not going to do this. This is sort of implied. And then we're going to go, okay, so those are your 4 perspectives, and then we're going to talk about your synergies and integration. Describe locations and moments in your project where multiple perspectives were combined to reach a level of integration. So for example, I'm thinking about the project that Nikki's team, Lakia and Tiffany, have a lobby that I think is actually trying to be a point where all of the 4 perspectives are working together. If I think about the courtyard in Stephen's project, if I think about the courtyard in Kylie's project, I think these are ways that you can show all 4 perspectives being met. So in that case, then some of the systems need to be available. Maybe it's a stormwater system has been made available, or a solar systems are made not available, made present. The best way to communicate this is, if you want to get all 4 perspectives, is you really want to try to do a perspective, an eye-level perspective that shows me standing, that gives me a sense of standing in a space and looking around and showing me, show me, don't tell me, that I can actually see the 4 perspectives at work. That would be probably the most awesome thing that you could probably do as a designer, is to be able to achieve that. Those of you who are not designers, I don't expect a pretty perspective. But I know that if you have your Revit file, you can generate a perspective. If you have to come in and hand draw on top of a base that you made in Revit, a wireframe that you made in Revit, that's fine. And then those of you who are going to be doing the in-depth analysis in daylighting, for example, or any kind of independent project, you can go ahead and assume that you'll get up to 10 points for that as extra credit. So that's not bad. And then finally, the presentation itself, which I'm still working on. You will be doing a graphic presentation, which would be a book or PDF or something like that. And then, of course, there'll be a video presentation or live presentation. I guess we could do both. It's up to you guys. Well, it should be up to me, but let's talk about it. That is the condensed version of your project, which will be very difficult to do. And that then will complete assignment 5. And I wanted to do this recording now and send it off to you now so you could begin to start to see what it is you want to do and begin working towards that as soon as possible. So I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions. I will send out a note with this of when we'd like to meet. I will be meeting with people on Tuesday night, and certainly Wednesday we'd have our group meeting where we can talk about this some more. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope you weren't overwhelmed by it, and I hope that you will email me questions, and we can go from there. Okay, thanks everyone.